So astrobiologists are fascinated by places like Dale's Gorge. Why is that? Well, one of the ways that we think about looking for evidence of life beyond the Earth, especially on planets orbiting other stars, is to look for evidence of oxygen in the atmospheres of those planets. And so as astrobiologists, we're really interested in understanding what controls the rise of oxygen in the atmosphere of a planet. And places like Dale's Gorge and other locations in Australia allow us to really explore this in detail. Because we have this really simple idea that if you get microbes evolving that can make oxygen, that they'll take over the world and you end up with an oxidized planet, and that it's a very simple one-to-one relationship. You get the evolution to make the right microbes, you'll have oxygen in the atmosphere, game over, end of story, and we can be looking for that sort of stuff. But it turns out when we look in detail at places like Dale's Gorge and the surrounding regions, you find out that the story is a bit more complicated. Why is it more complicated? Or at least it might be more complicated. Why might it be more complicated? Because we have here the conventional interpretation of Dale's Gorge Banded Iron Formation and the other banded iron formations is that they tell us that there was at least some oxygen in the environment to make this iron oxidized rust all around us. But at the same time, they tell us that there wasn't very much oxygen in the environment, that the atmosphere must have been pretty poor in oxygen, the oceans must have been very poor in oxygen, because otherwise you wouldn't have had so much iron in the oceans in the first place. So what these places tell us is that just because you have oxygen around, and just because you have oxygen being produced by microbes, doesn't necessarily mean that oxygen takes over the conditions of the environment. The ability to make oxygen in the environment is a necessary condition. You need to have microbes that do that. You need to have microbes that do that in order to have the possibility of making a planet an oxidized planet. But it's not a sufficient condition. There are other things that must come into play that control how much oxygen you can have in the atmosphere. And one of the big mysteries in trying to understand how the Earth transformed from an anoxic world to an oxic world is to try to understand what those factors must be. And we still debate about those quite a bit.